It's Saturday night in Pontiac, Michigan, and Rosalia Brantley is at the end of an eventful night out on the town.
She went with 2 or 3 of her girlfriends to a birthday party first.
And then later, dancing at a club in Pontiac. But in the wee hours of the morning, Rosalia goes out to use a payphone.
And that's the last time she's seen alive.
It will take almost 20 years for investigators to find out what happened that night. Friends and family pray that it won't be too late to see justice done for Rosalia Brantley. In the 1990s, Michigan has one of the highest crime rates in America, with dozens of homicides and countless crimes going unsolved. Years later, it takes concerned law enforcement and citizens to come out of retirement and volunteer their time in order to tackle the backlog of cases.
Currently, I'm a full-time attorney. I used to be a full-time police officer. I was a homicide sergeant in Houston, and that was back in the 80s. Now I'm an employment law attorney, and because of my past experience, when they formed the cold case unit, I was one of the original members. That was about 14 years ago.
I spent 25 years as a policeman in Detroit, and 20 of that was in homicide. It was busy. I became involved with the Oakland County Sheriff's Cold Case Unit because of my activity in Detroit police homicide. One of the things that 2 other guys and I did was start the Cold Case Unit at Detroit Police. After I retired from there, I connected with the Cold Case Unit of the Oakland County Sheriff, and they invited me to join that. I said, okay, no problem, love to do it.
We looked at homicides that have gone cold, usually about 10 years or more, and try to solve them. I know in Pontiac alone we had over 50, and I don't know what our total is, but there's a good number. We're a pretty big county.
But despite the danger, on this night of 1994, Rosalia and her friends are excited for a night out. She joins her 2 friends, Rokina and Bridget Sellers, at the home of their older sister, Ramona.
Ramona is Rosalia's best friend, and she's agreed to babysit Rosalia's son so the 3 younger women can go out.
They plan to go to a party first, and then dancing at a nightclub. They leave for the party sometime after 6 p.m. The party is at the home of one of their friends, Kenneth Wright.
It's a birthday party for Kenneth's grandmother.
About Rosalia Brantley, she was a single mom, had a young son, but she liked to party, she liked to have fun.
At the birthday party, Rosalia and Bridget enjoy a few drinks, while Rokina, who is pregnant, does not.
Rokina remains sober, so she's acting as a chaperone, keeping an eye on things, making sure everyone is safe, so that Rosalia can have as much fun as she wants.
While enjoying the birthday celebration, Rosalia gets a surprise visitor.
While she was at the party, she met up with, I believe Derek Mullins came by, and that was someone she was dating occasionally. And she was going to meet him later at a motel.
At one point, Rosalia and Rokina exit the party and get into a car with Derek Mullen. Derek gives Rosalia a bag, which she presumably forgot to take with her earlier. And they talk about meeting up later at a motel. After Derek leaves, Rosalia and Rokina go back into the party.
A man named Tommy Lee Williams speaks to Rosalia for the first of many times that night, but she doesn't seem to be particularly interested in him.
Later, a woman named Dawn Hannah agrees to give Rosalia, Rokina, and Bridget a ride to the club where they plan to go dancing.
In Pontiac, the Puerto Rican Club was called back then.
It's a popular spot on Perry Street in downtown Pontiac.
Although it's situated about 20 miles to the northwest, Pontiac is considered part of the greater metropolitan Detroit area.
Pontiac was a city that was booming for a long time. The music, of course, was great. The Motown music, couldn't beat it. And it was a good city to live in. It's an old city, and when they opened up the auto plants here, the place was booming. When the auto plants closed, it hurt the city. Pretty much drugs, murder, robberies, a lot of that in both places.
Pontiac is less than 5 miles from Auburn Hills, where Rosalia lives. They arrive at the club on Perry Street between 8 and 8:20 p.m. They talk to some friends outside the club first, then go in to dance. Although she attracts the attention of a lot of men at the club, Rosalia doesn't seem to be interested in any of them. She doesn't dance with anyone in particular.
Then Tommy Lee shows up at the club. He keeps trying to talk to Rosalia, but he's not getting anywhere.
Sober and watchful, Rokina sticks by her friend all night long and looks out for her. She doesn't see Rosalia go off with anyone that night. Dawn misplaces her car keys and asks Rokina for help finding them.
Rokina has been sticking pretty closely to Rosalia all night. She probably would hesitate about the thought of leaving her friend alone with all these men in the club, but maybe the fact that Bridget was there reassures her.
Unable to find the keys inside the club, Rokina goes outside with Dawn to look for them there.
Sometimes everything comes down to luck and timing. Bad luck in this case. When Rokina and Dawn are in the parking lot, something unexpected happens.
At 1:45, 2 o'clock in the morning, somebody started firing shots inside the club. And of course, people scooted out of there like roaches when you turn the lights on.
Although she wants to go back into the club and look for Rosalia and Bridget, Rokina knows it's too dangerous.
People are stampeding in all directions. Someone's shooting a gun. Obviously, she can't go back in. It's not just herself she has to think about, but the life of her unborn child.
Fearing for their lives, Dawn and Rokina get into a friend's vehicle and leave. Meanwhile, Rosalia and Bridget are inside the club when the shooting starts. They get separated in the confusion. Not surprisingly, Rokina arrives back at her sister Ramona's place first. A short while later, at about 2 a.m., Bridget also arrives at the house. Rosalia is not with her.
During the chaos, Bridget gets separated from her friends, and because of that, she has no idea where Rosalia is.
Concerned about her best friend, Ramona tries to page Rosalia. At about 2:15 a.m., the telephone rings. It's Rosalia responding to the page.
Her friends are relieved to know that Rosalia is okay. They've been worried that maybe she got shot or trampled.
Rosalia says that she's using a payphone near a place called Terry's Tires.
The tire store is on Perry Street, not that far from the nightclub. They're only about a mile apart.
In spite of making it safely away from the club, Rosalia seems a bit fearful on the phone. Ramona tells her to stay there, and someone will come and pick her up. Rokina and Bridget make the 10-minute drive to Terry's Tires. They find the payphone, but there's no sign of Rosalia. They search the immediate area and then the entire neighborhood, but she is nowhere to be found. They return home, hoping that maybe she's found her own way back. But she's not there. After her sisters come back empty-handed, Ramona pages Rosalia another 7 to 9 times, but she receives no response.
Her friends are obviously concerned about her, but they don't yet call the police. After all, Rosalia is an adult, and it's not illegal to stay out all night. They really doubt that the cops would do anything at that moment.
As the hours tick by with no response from Rosalia, her friends and family become more and more afraid. She's a mother with a young son whom she loves very much. She wouldn't just run away and abandon him. Ramona recalls her friend sounding fearful on the telephone. When she asks her what she plans to do, the young mother replies, "Whatever they want me to." Where is Rosalia Brantley? After leaving her young son with a close family friend, Rosalia has gone from a house party to a club to dance with her friends. While they dance at a club downtown, someone starts shooting and the friends get separated. Rosalia calls from a payphone to tell them that she's okay. But when her friends come to pick her up, she's nowhere to be found. When repeated calls to her pager go unanswered, her friends and family worry and pray that she comes home safely. Rosalia lives in Auburn Hills with her mother and 3-year-old until July of 1994, when she moves into the house next door.
She lives with a man named Irvine Pensiel. The two are not romantically involved, and he's not the father of Rosalia's child. The two are just friends.
No longer involved with her child's father, Rosalia begins dating a man named Derek Mullins.
It's a relatively recent relationship, but things seem to be going well. On the night she disappears, he brings her uniform to the birthday party.
Rosalia works as a nurse and often carries her uniform with her in a bag.
There's some disagreement as to whether or not she had it when she first leaves Ramona's house or if Derek brought it to her later, but Rokina distinctly remembers Derek handing the bag with the uniform to Rosalia.
But now she's not at work, she's not at home, and her family and friends have no idea where she is. Sadly, on the morning of Monday, August 29, 1994, the lifeless body of Rosalia Brantley is found in Hawthorne Park.
It's a park on the edge of Pontiac. It's a nice big park, and there's a lake within the park. There's a small boat launching ramp. It's not a fancy one with concrete piers or anything like that. There was a wooden walk alongside the launch area where you could hold onto the mooring line from the boat once it went in the water. But there was nothing fancy. There was pretty thick brush on both sides of the launch ramp. There was the cement ramp going down into the water, but there was a dirt path going to the cement. Not a fancy ramp. It's made for putting in small fishing boats. No more, no less.
She's found Monday morning. She's found by a homeless guy looking for bottles and cans, and he stumbles across her. She's wrapped up in a curtain. She's at this Hawthorne Park, which is a park with a little lake in Pontiac. She's not far from the dock. She's in these bushes. From the bushes, padded down, looks like her body was probably dragged about 10 feet. So we assume then, she's taken out of the trunk of the car, she's dragged 10 feet and dropped there.
The medical examiner has no trouble classifying this death as homicide. Investigators collect every piece of possible evidence and attempt to get fingerprints off the body, the curtain, everything, with no luck.
The cause of death appears to be a stab wound to the left breast. There's also a second stab wound in the neck, which could also be fatal. Numerous other wounds appear to be defensive. The victim's ankles, knees, hands, and upper arms are all bound with material from a torn white sheet. Her white nursing uniform is wrapped around her feet.
There were tire tracks in the dirt there, but not identifiable and no way to know whose tire tracks there were. So that was pretty much a dead end. They interviewed the people that she was with, interviewed her family, friends, that sort of thing.
After learning about Tommy Lee Williams talking to Rosalia repeatedly, investigators interview him. He admits that when the shooting starts at the club, he's with her.
She ended up getting a ride with a Tommy Williams, I believe his name was. Tommy Williams' brother and a guy named something Houston.
Actually, with him and two other guys in I think it was a U-Haul rental truck. But they were out on Perry Street, not far from the club, and she told them she needed to call to her girlfriend's home to let them know she was okay. So they did. They stopped at a tire store, Terry's Tires on Perry Street, and she called from a payphone there in the drive to let them know that she was okay, and they told her, stay right there, we're on the way to pick you up. She didn't stay right there. She went to the home of one of the guys in the truck, Tommy Williams.
Tommy Lee has been trying to get Rosalia's attention for hours, and now because of what happened at the club, he finally has her alone in his home.
They have a couple of drinks, followed by unprotected sex.
According to Tommy Williams, at about 4 in the morning, she gets a page, 4:30.
She gets a bunch of pages, but this one is different. This one, she says she needs to call back because she has $50 of this guy's money and she needs to meet him. The only problem is Tommy doesn't have a phone at his place.
She wants Tommy to take her to the phone booth to return the call. And he's saying, it's 4:30 in the morning, it's raining out, this can wait. She says, no, it can't. So she leaves. And that's the last time she's seen alive by anyone other than obviously her killer or killers.
She walked, presumably, to go to that payphone at Terry's Tire, but we have no idea if she made it there or not.
Before she leaves, Tommy says he'll leave his door ajar for her so she can come back. Soon after that, he falls asleep on the couch. The next morning, he realizes that his door is still ajar and Rosalia never came back. Because Tommy is the last person to see her, detectives question him thoroughly. They even give him a polygraph test, which he passes. After a thorough search of his home turns up nothing incriminating, investigators conclude that this is not the crime scene. Although he admits to having sex with her, the semen, blood, and tissue samples taken from Rosalia's body do not match Tommy Lee Williams. It's becoming clear that investigators are looking for another man.
There was plenty of potential suspects. I mean, she's just with his Tommy Williams. He admits they had sex with her. There's the guy that she was dating and she was supposed to meet later at a motel that night. She was wrapped up in curtains that looked like they came from maybe a cheap motel or something. That was all checked and rechecked and could never determine where she was murdered.
In this case, we had nothing. We had nothing as far as evidence. We had no crime scene. And the investigators back then looked at a lot of places.
Investigators chase all leads, but none of them pan out. The case slowly goes stone cold. After a night out in Pontiac, Michigan, 22-year-old mother Rosalia Brantley goes missing. Her body is later found in a park, wrapped in a large curtain. After following all leads as far as they can, investigators reluctantly admit defeat, and the case goes stone cold. The Oakland County Sheriff's Department's Cold Case Unit is made up of 8 volunteer police officers who dedicate their time and expertise to solving cold cases. With resources stretched to the limit, the Sheriff's Department is unable to assign regular police officers to look at cold cases. So that's why retired officers, lawyers, and other experienced crime solvers come into play. Now that the unit's been around a few years, staffed solely by volunteers, not many crimes go unsolved in Oakland County.
The investigation of cold cases is not as exciting as many people might think or that you might see on TV. And we don't go running around banging doors and that sort of thing. What we do is read a lot, review cases, review evidence, see if there's new information that might work in our favor on an old case.
Well, we review old files and we try to rate them as far as their solvability. The ones we think there's a possibility, we prioritize. and we start anew. We look at the case, we number the pages, we interview witnesses, we look at the property. We try to determine if there's anything that could be submitted, especially with the advancements in technology. This case was not one we had reviewed. This case we got a tip from, I believe it was Kent County.
We got a tip that there was a fellow locked up in the Kent County Jail over in Grand Rapids, Michigan, who had been bragging to his cellmate about the terrible things he'd done, presumably to get some jail credentials so he wouldn't be a victim there in jail.
That jailhouse snitch said that a person was bragging about murder in Pontiac, and the body had been dumped in the park, in Pontiac Park.
One of the things he told his cellmate was that he had killed a girl in Pontiac and dumped her body in one of the parks in this area. Well, Kent County got in touch with us and told us what the guy had said. We looked through the files and found the case of Rosalia Brantley, who was killed at some unknown place, but then her body was, for lack of a better term, just dumped by the boat launch ramp in a park in the northern part of Pontiac.
So it was a woman that was murdered, dumped in a park. So we thought this is a good possibility.
That's pretty much how we got involved in the case. We had not reviewed the case prior to that, but we got at it pretty seriously after we got the information that this guy had been bragging about a killing of that nature.
While studying the old case files, Lou and Bill learned that one of the reasons it's stone cold is that no one has ever been able to find the crime scene.
The investigators in 1994 never found a scene. We didn't find a scene 15 years later when we worked the case. We knew where her body was found, but we do not know where the murder took place. Don't know. She was wrapped in a curtain. It was a heavy-duty type curtain that you would find in a motel, but we never found where it belonged. And yes, that makes it more difficult because one of the rules in criminal investigation, particularly murder investigations, is that a person does not go into a scene without leaving evidence of their presence or taking evidence with them. There's always something. May not be much, but there's always something. In this case, we had nothing. That's frustrating. It was frustrating for them, and it was frustrating for us also. Once we looked through their investigation, we knew that they had worked hard at it, but there was just nothing to find.
One other detail jumps out at them.
And we noted that there was DNA evidence in the case that had not been matched to anybody at that point.
Well, 94 DNA was a relatively new thing.
Yes, it was very new. It did not become widely used until later in the 1990s. It was pretty much brand new for police work, police investigations in 94, 95. So there was not a database back then that we could compare to. There is now.
Well, at this point, we identified the person that the jailhouse snitch had identified.
The fellow was out of jail by that time. We found him on a some sort of a minor warrant and brought him in, took a DNA sample from him, and sent that in to be compared with the DNA. The lab came back with information for us, sort of a good news, bad news situation. Bad news is it wasn't that guy who had been bragging about it in Kent County Jail. Good news was we might want to look at Brandon Gohagen, because that was a match on the DNA.
Brandon Gohagen is a name that pops up that had not been on our radar at all. And coincidentally, he's in prison for another murder rape of a woman who was also beaten and bound, much like Rosalia Brantley.
With new information gathered by investigators, and with the help of the new technology available, investigators are cautiously optimistic that this cold case is about to heat up. It's been 19 years since 22-year-old Rosalia Brantley is found murdered after a night of partying in Pontiac, Michigan. Police receive a tip that a prisoner in Kent County Jail is bragging about killing her. A DNA test is quick to prove that this suspect is not the one who raped and murdered Rosalia Brantley. But in a bizarre twist, the DNA database returns a match with another man in the system. Someone investigators have never even heard of in connection with this case. Brandon Gohagen is currently serving time in prison for the rape and murder of another woman, which makes him seem like a good suspect for Rosalia Brantley's murder.
The first thing we need to do is, first of all, find out where he was back then. Was he in prison or not, and is he a viable suspect?
We also knew more things about Brandon Gohagen. We know that he had been accused of raping several women during that time period, sometimes at gunpoint, sometimes with violence, sometimes with threats against a woman or against her children.
He was brutal. He raped at gunpoint. He raped with physical violence. In fact, he told one woman just several months before Rosalia Brantley was found in the bushes in the park, "If I don't get this, you're gonna end up dead behind the bushes." And that night he had raped 2 women. So he was clearly a true sociopath. And so myself and my sergeant at the time, Joe Bryan, we went to prison to interview him. We wanted him to think we didn't have any specific knowledge he was involved, that we were just asking him about a broad, "Hey, we know you committed a murder, you were running with some people, maybe you have some knowledge about these homicides." So we didn't want him on the defensive.
Lou was worried that Brandon might say he knows Rosalia, and in fact, that they have some sort of relationship.
Well, they did go to the same high school. Whether they knew each other in high school or not, we don't know. Her friends didn't know him, and we can't ask her. Had he been in a relationship with this woman, Rosalie, that would have presented a big problem, because it would at least explain why his DNA could be in her vagina. Not necessarily under her left fingernails, though. But what we're hoping to get is him denying that he knows her, denying that he ever had sex with her, denying any involvement with Rosalia Brantley at all. Because then how does he explain his DNA in her vagina and under her left fingernails?
He was pretty adamant that he did not know this girl. Never seen her, never met her, didn't know her, certainly never had sex with her, which we know to be a lie.
In fact, he told me you'll never find another woman that would say I treated her badly. I had 2 rape reports with me of 2 other women that he had raped.
And that opened a door for us because we knew he was lying about that. That provided the opening to charge him.
So we did a buccal swab on him, submitted his DNA, and confirmed the hit. And we got what we wanted.
Brandon Gohagen is arrested and charged with the murder of Rosalia Brantley. Prosecutors hope that when it goes to trial, they'll have enough evidence to get a conviction. On November 28, 2016, the prosecution charges Brandon Gohagen with first-degree premeditated murder, first-degree felony murder, and first-degree criminal sexual conduct. On the first day of the trial, the prosecutor drops the first-degree premeditated murder charge and proceeds with the other 2. The prosecution paints a picture of murder arising from a violent sexual assault.
The defense does what it can, but in the end, the jury finds Gohagen guilty on both counts. The judge sentences him as a second-degree habitual offender.
Gohagen receives life in prison without parole for the felony murder conviction and up to 20 to 60 years in prison for the sexual assault. Gohagen's lawyer appeals the decision.
The defense basically admits that Gohagen had sex with Rosalia, but they say that the prosecution never proved 2 key things. 1, that he caused her death or that he forced her to have sex with him, and 2, that he caused her injuries or death.
In the absence of sufficient proof, the defense says the court must vacate Gohagen's convictions. The results of the forensic examination show that Rosalia has multiple cuts and slashes on her face, as well as extensive blunt force injuries to her face, eye, neck, chest, and torso.
These injuries are clearly pre-mortem, occurring while the victim was still alive, and probably the result of a struggle.
There's additional scraping, bruising, and contusions on Rosalia's left hand and forearm.
These are clearly defensive wounds. The blood and tissue found under Rosalia's fingernails, later matched to Gohagen's DNA, is also evidence of defensive action. The physical evidence overwhelmingly supports the theory that Rosalia's injuries were sustained during an attempt to ward off a violent sexual assault.
The medical examiner sheds further light on the cause of death.
The fatal 6.5-inch deep stab wound to Brantley's left lower breast was caused by inserting a blade not just once, but partially removing it and inserting it a second time at a slightly different angle.
Aside from the chest wounds, Rosalia also suffered a potentially fatal stab wound to her neck that punctured her voice box.
The nature of these injuries clearly supports the finding that they were inflicted to kill, or at least to do great bodily harm.
On October 18, 2018, the State of Michigan Court of Appeals concludes that the evidence presented during the trial was sufficient to permit a rational jury to conclude beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant was guilty of both sexual assault and felony murder. Gohagen's appeal is denied.
We were very lucky in this case. Most cases are not solved this way. If the inmate in Kent County hadn't been bragging about committing a murder, this case would likely never have been solved.
If I told you that there were no high fives or fist bumps, that wouldn't be true. We were pleased that we got, first, that we got the warrant, and second, that we got a conviction.
This one was particularly nice because Bill Peterson and I were there for the verdict, and Rosalia Brantley's mother was still alive, and her son, who was now like maybe 23 or something like that, years old, were both there. And so after the verdict, there was hugs. The mom was thrilled that finally there was justice for her daughter. She's passed away now, so I'm very grateful. We're very grateful that this was able to be brought to a conclusion before she passed. And then her son, he said he never thought he would see that day. And he described how hard it was, his childhood, to be without his mother and knowing his mother died in such a brutal way.
For Rosalia's family, there is at least some sense of closure. And although nothing can bring her back, perhaps they can rest a little easier knowing that justice has finally been done.